Well, hey there, and welcome to the Experienship Podcast. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Danlee. We are two besties hanging out and sharing our experiences in a friendship.
So sit down, get comfortable, and enjoy.
Hey guys, we're back.
Hey.
Today, Brittany and I have a pretty interesting topic for you. It's women's health. So we've been talking about, over time, just a number of topics that are really big in both of our lives, and they seem to come up quite a bit, and they're all around women's health, things that we've gone through, things that our friends have gone through, things that we've heard women go through, and they're just too big of topics to just pass by and pass over. So we thought, let's give them an episode. So here we are to hit some of those things, and hopefully some of you guys can relate, and I think you will. Brittany has a little bit of a sinus infection, but no big deal.
No big deal. Just one. It's got to have one per season.
Yeah. So that's all good. So we can jump in. I know Brittany had some stuff on her mind tonight that we were chatting about that would be a good way to start.
So I feel like when talking about women's healthcare, you can't not talk about hormones and changing hormones and all of that. And I'm in my 30s. I mean, we're both in our 30s, but just a couple years apart. But I have had the most insane night sweats. My hormones have changed. I've gone to the doctor. We've tried different things and it's not working. And so just dealing with that only in my 30s, and I haven't even hit menopause, is insane to me. I can't even imagine what menopause is going to be like, because my mom went through it and it wasn't a good experience for her. So I'm like, my genetics are probably headed that way anyway. But yeah, I've had a lot of, on top of the hormone changes, I've had a lot of hair loss as well. So I finally, I have a lot of really thin hair. And so I finally got it to where it was nice and long and healthy and everything. And then I went through this really stressful stage in life, and my hormones were all changing and everything. And I have lost so much hair. It's so frustrating.
No, I mean, but your hair has been looking really good. I don't know if that was more of a problem before or now too, but it seems like your hair's gotten really long and healthy looking lately.
Yeah, my hairstylist has done a really good job of making sure when I go bleach my hair, we don't overdo it or something like that, because my hair's blonde. So we try, and she's very careful when she cuts my hair, that she doesn't cut it too thin or something like that. So I think my hairstylist gets some credit with that one.
Yeah, we appreciate our stylists and all of our other health and beauty people. Shout out.
Shout out, seriously. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've experienced anything with perimenopause or any of that, but the night sweats really get me. I wake up at 4 a.m. every single time. It's 4:30, just covered in sweat. And then all of a sudden I can't go back to sleep because my sweat dries and I'm cold. So it's the most frustrating thing. You have to take another shower, and then sometimes you have to get up in the middle of the night and change your sheets. And
yeah, you've told me so many mornings, when we wake up and text, another night sweat, and it's just dang, because you don't really plan for that, right? And then it's
no.
Okay, now I have to deal with all of this right now.
And I don't like my sleep being messed with. So
for sure,
it's my own body doing it to myself. I can't handle it.
Sleep can be hard enough on its own, right? Yeah.
Seriously. Well,
my main hormonal issues are obviously around childbirth and pregnancy, which I'll talk a little bit about, but more recently thinking of different birth control methods that I've messed around with. It's crazy because most of these birth controls are all hormone based, right? And the ones that aren't, the devices, have their own side effects that have their own problems. And so none of it's a perfect scenario. And I think that's where what you're saying, and just when I think about birth control, I think about what women really go through, and there's not a ton of awareness. It just seems so common that people don't talk about it enough, but I think sometimes we really suffer and go through a lot more than people realize, and we don't always talk about it because it just seems so normal, or people don't want to hear about it, that kind of thing. But you really go through a lot trying these different hormone methods and just for basic birth control needs, whether it's to prevent pregnancy or if your periods are really bad and you're trying to relieve those symptoms. More recently, I've tried a progesterone oral birth control. I did not like it. It was actually it was drospirenone, which is like a form of a progesterone. And I was really hopeful about it because I've had like liver issues in pregnancy. And so it's like not recommended that I take estrogen, which was something I relied on for years before I got pregnant for the first time. But both of my pregnancies, I had cholestasis, which is an issue of your liver processing bile. So you have like a buildup of bilirubin in your blood, and it's either induced by pregnancy or you can have it non-pregnancy related. Mine were both pregnancy related, so they both like went away after pregnancy, thank goodness. Yeah, because the symptoms were just terrible. But anyway, following pregnancy, it's just something to watch out for. If you like estrogen is known to induce it. And so I've been advised not to take estrogen contraceptives anymore. And so that's been a really weird thing since having children, because my whole life before that, my adult life, that was something that I used all the time. So I started kind of messing around with different birth control methods, and I've used IUDs, I've used like arm implant, different contraceptives that are non-estrogen, and just the range of different things that you can put your body through.
Yeah.
It's nuts, the side effects are wild, and not to mention the procedures to even get those devices inserted, and everything is just wild in itself. That's a different topic. But anyway, just the hormone fluctuations and those side effects can be really traumatic.
And especially switching your medicine so often, just trying alone to find something that works for you. I can't imagine what your body goes through just trying to adjust to the different medications that you're throwing at it.
Yeah, and when you think you're like used to one thing, you may end up starting to have weird symptoms like cysts on your ovaries that are painful, or heavy periods that develop that you didn't have before. And so it's not like a, one thing works and it works forever kind of situation. So I think that's something that all women really experience, is this range of birth control methods on the market, and the like kind of circus dance to figure out the one that works for you, because we're all so different. Our bodies and our hormones are just insanely different. And so we all go through something completely different, and our side effects, some people don't have any side effects. Some people have a ton, One of that drospirenone one that I tried recently, I gained like 5 pounds within a month. And I was cramping every day. Yeah. And it's like little things, but you're going nuts, anyway. Yeah. The birth control, that's a big one for me.
Yeah. Well, I had been on estrogen since I was 14. I'm not going to give my age away completely, even though I said I was in my 30s. But I have been on estrogen for so long. And then finally, my doctor switched me to a progesterone pill. And I was pretty scared, but it helps with the bleeding and everything, and it makes it to where it's not as insanely painful.
Yeah.
And I just take the pill straight forward, so I don't have any periods, thank goodness. But when I do,
meaning you skip the placebo week that's in each like birth control pack. Okay.
Yeah. So this is actually just a set of pills that gets prescribed. There's no placebo pills that come with it.
So it's just like a bottle of pills, and you just take them straight through every day. There's no stopping. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've actually really liked it. I have gained a little bit of weight, but I don't know if that's due to other factors. But
there's so many things that could
there's
be,
so many
right?
things to consider. But I've actually liked it, and I feel it makes me feel a little bit better knowing that I'm not causing my liver so much damage
with the estrogen, right?
With the estrogen, right? So
yeah, I know we both.
I've had luck with the progesterone, and I've actually really liked it.
That's good. Yeah, I know we both did a lot of reading on estrogen and the side effects on your health overall, but also on your liver over time. There's been a lot of women that have had like a lot of liver damage after years of like chronic estrogen birth control use. And it's scary because you don't know you can't see it, right? Like you don't even know if it's happening.
Right. Yeah. Until you go get a random blood test and it's like, oh, your liver enzymes are shot.
Yeah. Yeah. Birth control could be super tricky to get right. And not to mention like the effectiveness, right? So like that's obviously one of the bigger issues with that.
So like with taking like with the IUD and stuff, like talk me through that. Like what was that like?
Dude, the IUD, I actually had my first IUD. It was the Mirena intrauteral device inserted before my first child was born. So that actually made it even more traumatic, perhaps, because I had never had any like vaginal trauma or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, now that I've had children, I kind of know what like major pain, like cervical vaginal pain feels like, but then I didn't. And it was really intense because they, you know, insert vaginally and then it penetrates like through your cervix with the device, no anesthetic or anything. And I just think that's so underrated. Like the fact that you can puncture your cervix and insert a device without any anesthesia is kind of wild because I was absolutely traumatized and sore for days.
Or any sort of medicine. Do they give you anything?
No, right, no. And so you just, you go through that and you kind of just recover on your own with ibuprofen and rest or whatever. And then getting it removed was also, perhaps, I think getting it removed was worse. Like, because there's like a string that basically hangs through the cervix. Like, there's like a little cervical barrier. It's like a like mucous membrane layer that separates your vagina from your cervix, and the string, the device is in the cervix, so the string hangs through that like layer and it stays out. And so they tell you every once in a while, like once a month or so, like feel to make sure the string is still like, you can still feel it to make sure it's still in place, in the right place. So, you know, it would...
doesn't sound like a fun situation.
And then, and then when it came time to actually remove it, literally what the doctor does is they just put their hand in and just
pull the string.
Just pull it hard. Yeah.
Ew, that makes my body hurt.
It is bad. Yeah. So that's one. And then the Nexplanon implant in my arm that I had, and that one was more recent. I've had it removed recently, but that one was crazy because they actually made an incision with a scalpel. I mean, there was like lidocaine, like local anesthetic. So it's not just like torture me. I'm in, you know,
Oh my God.
But it's still wild. They just insert this like 1 inch long little skinny rod into your arm that stays there for 3 years. And my last daughter that was born, she's over 3 years old now. So my device expired, and so I went and had it removed recently, and they deaden it again, make another little incision. This part was crazy. They have to remove some scar tissue. Like there's like scar tissue that builds up around it, so there's like some tugging and stuff like that, and then they yank it out and they do like a little butterfly stitch thing, like the liquid stuff, not an actual suture. And then what was really wild was like my arm was like insane bruised after that. Like all right here looks so bad.
Just from that little incision.
I looked like I got my ass beat.
Oh my God, ow.
Yeah.
I know like having a bruise like that. It looks like you got beat up.
It does. I mean, you've had some painful stuff done too, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a colposcopy done. So basically what that is it's just an examination. They use a colposcope and they go in to view any sort of in your part of your uterus or whatever. So then they go in, and if they need to take a biopsy, they will. But the biopsy part, so the colposcopy is not, it's not very comfortable, just the whole situation. The colposcope is fine in itself, but when they go in and take the biopsy, they're literally scraping away pieces of your inside of your uterus.
Awesome.
So like
scraping.
Like, it's not fun.
That's inside your body, scraping.
They're scraping. And I have had another friend who's had a few different multiple colposcopies, and hers end up being really painful. Like her body just kind of rejects it. And so it's just really uncomfortable because it's like, it's almost like
trauma.
You had
it's
it.
trauma.
Yeah, you're scraping away parts of tissue. Anyway, and so again, same thing. No anesthetic, no pain meds. They tell you just to go home and do like a cold or hot compress on your body if you want, and then
Which is like the
some
same thing.
ibuprofen.
Yeah, the same thing someone would do if they worked out too hard or something, right? Like, oh, you go like use a warm compress on your like triceps. Like, oh my gosh, like this is so much worse than that.
I know. So it's just not fun because you go in there trusting them, that they're going to have your best interest at mind. But the way that the healthcare is set up is to where like it's not required. I don't know. It just baffles me a little bit, like your experience and then my experience with the colposcopy, and then just having other friends that have had different procedures done that are simple like that, quote unquote simple.
Mm-hmm.
It just baffles me because men go get a vasectomy and they get all of the treatment and all of the medicine.
Yes. No, it's so true. And I feel like that's something that's like a comparison that's made a lot. And so I feel like men are always just like, haha, like, yeah, whatever. Like we hear that all the time. Like, but it's very real. Like I think the number of things women go through. It gets
brought up so many times because it's the best example.
And that's why we're talking about it tonight, because it's like these things, even basic things, just having a monthly period, like some of these things can be insanely like debilitating and pain inducing for women, which there's obviously a huge degree of variability, but it's still just, and then we still are expected to go on with our lives. Not that I'm saying, let me go rest up, I want to sleep all the time. I just mean that it's just something we have to deal with and there's not really a choice. And it's very hard, right? These things that you are like kind of forced to deal with basically just because you're a woman and that's your anatomy. I mean, my biggest, example that I can think of like about what you're saying is childbirth. Like when you're saying the things about the colposcopy, like sounds like no one really told you what to really expect, right? And that's how I felt with childbirth too. I felt like there was a lot of, it's okay, you'll get through it. And I think that's people trying to support you, but I also feel like no one was very real with me about how traumatic it was going to be. And I wished I was more prepared for that. Like, I think women should even maybe go through therapy prior to childbirth, like solely solely like, or something like that, some meditation schedule or something. I don't know, but just something to really focus on like what you're about to go through. Because after I gave birth to my first baby, I just remember like just being absolutely traumatized and just asking my family, my grandma, my mom, like my sister, do women do like this is what happens all the time? Yeah. Like, are you kidding me? Like, can anyone acknowledge what just happened? Because it was wild. But also that's coming from like, I haven't had a medically eventful life, thankfully. So, having my first baby was like a very big medical event, like for me.
Yeah.
Compared, I don't know, like I said, a lot of variability between people. And I know that everyone's experiences are different, but that was scary. And I just wish people talked about it. That's it.
Yeah. I don't feel like women do, at least on my side of the perspective too, because my mom she always would say, oh, how much she loved childbirth and loved being pregnant with me. And it was so beautiful. And everybody's in this fairy tale la la land. And then you giving birth was my experience of any of my friends having a baby. I mean, you're still really the only one experienced childbirth with, not that I was in the room with you, but I mean just being around it and everything. And I'm like
closely.
I don't know how women do it. I don't want it personally, and I don't know how women.
I don't blame you for not wanting it personally, because yes, wanting a child is one thing, but
you can adopt.
Right. Like, really, though, like the pregnancy, not even to mention, like, I won't even get into trying to conceive and everything that happens before pregnancy, because that's a whole nother episode, right? Like the things women go through trying to conceive with, issues and fertility problems and the stress of that. But yeah, like being pregnant, giving birth, and postpartum, like those periods of your life are absolutely insane. And for some reason, I did it twice.
When you told me you guys were trying for baby number 2, I was like, are you insane? Do you not remember the first time around?
Clearly, some kind of weird thing happened in my brain because the first time was pretty scary. But yeah, I really wanted a second kid. I will say, I don't want to like harp on childbirth a ton, but I do want to say that a unique experience with the second birth was COVID, like giving birth during COVID.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people, not even just women giving birth, any medical situation happening during like the pandemic was different than the rest of.
It was insane.
Yeah, and it was for me then too. When my first child was born, you were there, and you were there like waiting, you were there the whole time. When my second child was born, it was during the pandemic. No one else was allowed to be in the hospital or anything. It was my husband and I, and it was very isolating. There were also a lot of women giving birth during that time, which was crazy. And the staff was very busy, and I felt very alone a lot of the time that I was there. I felt like I labored a lot and was in a lot of pain, like alone. And Francis was there, but it was just, there were times that I just felt like this is the worst feeling, you know? And then, you know, with both of them having issues, like kind of with jaundice and stuff like that after inducing early and having cholestasis, like we stayed several days in the hospital and things like that. And it just made that time during COVID very long and very isolating and really hard to deal with. And the like postpartum depression, like it's real and it's hard to process and it's hard to get through. It's hard to navigate. And especially if you're breastfeeding, there's a lot of like medications that you can't take that you would normally take for depression.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's just a lot to cope with. And so COVID was a special time for sure. I know a lot of women feel that.
Well, there are, you know, speaking of mental health, that's a really big issue for women's health too. So women get blamed so the actual physical or mental disorders usually get just blamed on anxiety, and then it usually doesn't actually get seen as a serious issue. And so I know this personally because I've had some mental health issues, and people just think, oh, you're going to be fine. Everything's okay. And I'm like, no, but I'm really depressed. Like, I'm actually depressed. This is an issue.
Yeah.
And so women experience and are diagnosed with anxiety and depression twice more as likely to be diagnosed than men. And about 1 in 5 women have a mental health problem. So I really think that this just goes into, there's this kind of stigma where it's like women are fine, you'll be fine, you can handle it. But really we can't, you know, and there's not a lot of studies on women's health. And mental health alone. It's always looped in with something about men or society in general. It's not specifically women, you know, specific statistics, which I think is kind of sad because that also goes into the medication, like you were saying, like making sure that you're diagnosed properly so that you have the right medication for your body and for what you need. So,
yeah. Do you think that the range of statistics there, like the big difference in women being diagnosed with mental health illness and anxiety more than men is because of overdiagnosis or because of these extra strains that we're talking about that maybe men don't experience? Or maybe both, right? It could be both.
I think it's a lot of because I really believe it's because of the strains. I don't specifically know if there's a study behind that. I didn't look that up, but
I just wonder what your opinion is.
Yeah, I feel like it's because of the extra strains. Like one of the things that I was going to kind of get to, but I just want to touch a point on. So Melinda Gates has a book called The Moment of Lift, and it talks about economic strains on women, and it talks about a lot of, you know, around the world, but specifically in the US, women work 90 minutes more of unpaid labor than men each day. So unpaid labor is where you're doing specific chores, specific things. Like unpaid labor in other countries would look like women going and doing agriculture and not getting paid for it, women going and doing the laundry and not getting paid for it, that sort of thing. So around the house, unpaid labor is, you know, going to get the groceries, is doing the dishes, the laundry, all of that kind of stuff. And people just see that as chores, but that's technically unpaid labor. Think of something that you would pay a maid for or pay, you know, service for. You know, that's labor. And so if you're not paying somebody, you're doing it for free in your own house, essentially. And so that's what unpaid labor is. And so that what she gets into is there's, you know, it's off between men and women in a typical heterosexual relationship. So, but we're not getting into that. But I think the strains of that, we're still in a very traditional sense of the world, you know, of having those chores. Women do certain chores around the house. And also something that she mentions in the book is that so youth getting pregnant is because of lack of contraceptives and things like that. And so it ends up holding women back, and it holds back their access to education because they're needing to stay back home and watch kids. So I really like that book. So if anybody wants to read it, it's Melinda Gates's The Moment of Lift.
Yeah, no, those are good points.
It's a good book though.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think the strain, going back to that, you know, just having that unpaid labor and the stress of being, you know, a female in the world, we're already trying to fight, you know, just being equal with our peers. We're trying to fight having a good, you know, our household put together and, you know, doing and being all these things all at once. And it's really hard because society wants us to be able to do everything. And I really feel like it's a strain.
It is. It's impossible to keep up. It's impossible to have it all done and then also feel your best at the same time. Those days are kind of rare, right? Where you feel like everything's done and you're feeling good and rested. And it's just, that's not common. Those strains are frequent, and that's a real issue for sure.
Yeah. Well, even me in my house, I specifically put off certain chores because they stress me out. But I can't. I have to be the only one to do it because I live by myself.
Yeah, no kidding.
So there's no choice.
Yeah, for sure, right? And there's certain things that you don't have a choice to do, right? That you have to do. But in terms of feeling well and accomplished and like you've done a good hard day's work and you've gotten your house in a place that's good and dinner is done and everyone's fed, like those, that's a struggle to keep up with every single day, you know? But not to mention that that's a struggle, but another topic we wanted to hit on was the fact that doing that without healthcare can be a huge impediment on all of those struggles that are already there already. But women who do not have access to healthcare, it just makes life insanely harder. You know, you have this insane financial burden and may even not get the healthcare you need because you can't afford it. You don't want to pay the doctor's bill, so you choose to go without certain things. And it just adds that's just a layer of stress and hardship for anybody. But a lot of, I mean, for women, because that's who we're focusing on, that is a hard thing. I'm not going to name this person, but there's a person that I know who has been on disability for a few years and does not make enough money to qualify for Medicaid, but cannot afford like marketplace healthcare. So that person is struggling to pay for life in general, but then you just add all of the health care needs on top of it that go by the wayside because it's not the priority at the time, you know, unless it's an emergency, and then you end up with a list of hospital bills. And so that's something that's really important to acknowledge too. That's just one example of a person I know, but there's so many people in this country that struggle with obtaining health care.
So commonwealthfund.org did a study. It was a select study, so it was a select number of countries. It wasn't all the countries. It was just a select number of large countries, and, you know, among like France and, you know, Australia and things like that. And US was the only one that had uninsured women or uninsured people. And then women in the US have among the highest rates, and in some cases the highest rate of skipping or delaying needed care because of the cost and having medical bill problems. And that comes directly from the commonwealthfund.org, which I think is so sad. The fact that there's these needed healthcare, you can't afford it, you're pushing it back, you know, just a typical pap smear. I mean, I remember looking at what it would cost for, it might have been the colposcopy, it might have been something else, but not having insurance, you know, thinking about the cost it is just to even get a mastectomy. I mean,
what? A breast reduction?
a breast reduction and a mammogram is what I meant to say too. Like if you don't have insurance and insurance doesn't approve anything, it's a bunch of money out of pocket, and it shouldn't cost that much.
Oh yeah, it's insane. And I know
basic exam.
Yeah, I mean, that is basic, right? That's your preventative medicine that saves people's lives every day. That is early cancer detection. I mean, it's really basic and essential. And I know that we had conversations with our friends recently, kind of putting a feeler out there. Who all has gone periods of time in the United States? We all live in the United States, this group of friends. Who's gone without healthcare for at least a stunt of time in their lives, and several of us have. I think the majority of us said yes. Yeah. And that was because we couldn't afford it for whatever the reason was at the time. It was not accessible. And we even put a little poll on Instagram before this episode asking some of our followers, like, have you gone through periods without healthcare? And several people responded yes. And it's just common. I think in the United States, I think we kind of feel like, oh yeah, it's super common. But I think if you're, from another country and you listen to this, like, it's not as common.
No, it's not.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people really struggle with that. And not to mention that the healthcare itself got its own hoops and hurdles, like I know our friend Molly had this whole story about this insane fibroid tumor that grew to the size of like 3 pounds in her abdomen. And I know
I didn't realize it was 3 pounds.
Yeah, it was huge. Her abdomen was distended. And this kind of goes back to the women kind of being brushed off, right? Like, oh, it's okay, this and that. They finally went and did an exploratory surgery on her, and she was under anesthesia for a really long time. And they found this huge tumor.
Oh my
Didn't know if it was cancer or benign. They biopsied it. They were able to remove it after a really long surgery. And thankfully, she was okay, but she had a huge incision that went like up and down her body that could have been avoided. Very painful, like lengthy recovery. Like that was a big event for her, I know for sure. And she was one of our Instagram poll responders. And she reminded me of that story because I remember that happening. And I was like, wow, like that's one of those wild ones, but it happens. It happens.
Yeah. Well, even so getting, because we've got another friend that has had a hysterectomy, and I have another friend in Houston that had one. And I've been looking into getting a breast reduction. And those kinds of surgeries are really hard because the insurance fights you to make sure that, because they don't want to pay for it. Yeah. So they're going to make you jump through all these hoops to make sure, like, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried pain meds? Have you tried therapy? Have blah, 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 blah. They want you to try all of these different things.
Meanwhile, you're just in pain along the way, like, hoping you eventually get it.
My back hurts, and I have had big boobs for a long time, so I'm ready for them to be off of my body. But what I didn't realize is that when you start the process, which I haven't continued with the process since last year, because you have to have the same insurance through the whole process.
Wow.
Which makes sense now, but I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't think like, oh, you could just switch it over. Like it has to be the same insurance from the get-go. So
I had no idea.
Essentially, yeah. So when I, depending on what insurance I end up with, I'm waiting until I've got a solid insurance, because right now my insurance at work isn't that great, which is also kind of sucky too in itself.
Right. Yeah.
But because I'm relying on it through work and I don't want to go private, So anyway, so I have to essentially now depending on what happens in the future, I have to start all over again. And it doesn't matter how far I got or anything like that. So it's just wild because like my mom went through a breast reduction in like the 2000s, early 2000s. And even she had to fight insurance. It was a very long time before they would even approve her, and she had way bigger boobs than me.
Did she? I guess I didn't know her before her breast reduction, but it's hard to imagine.
No. Her boobs were like double G's.
Whew! And just think of that. I mean, really though, like the weight of carrying that around for years and years, and you need it. And, you know, the physical therapists or whatever may say, yes, you need it. But since you haven't had the same health insurance to see the same doctors for X amount of time, it's delayed this process potentially, you know, for whoever, like, so many times, X amount of times, X amount of years or whatever, because of that. And not because you didn't need it, but because of the system, the bureaucracy of it.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's nuts.
I looked up how long it takes to get approved for a hysterectomy. Really bad cases, it's like about 180 days. But some people,
and that's
can be
crazy.
but yeah, right. But then for a lot of people, it's like it can be from 2 to 4 years.
Yeah, okay, that's
before
wild.
you get approved. Isn't that nuts?
Yes, we have a friend who's in the process of she's getting her hysterectomies planned soon, but it's been a little bit of a process getting to that point. And even still, it's still a couple months out. Like it hasn't even happened yet, you know. And so I know that that's something that it's taken like years of complaining, many diagnostic tests and things like that to prove like, okay, we can't do anything about this, we can't do anything about that. Like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, like whatever all the things are. We've tried all the things, all the methods, all the treatments. Now you qualify for a hysterectomy. And the thing that, I mean, I understand it's an invasive surgery, but the thing that's just crazy, back to the vasectomy thing, is you can just call up a urologist and say, I want to schedule my vasectomy, you know, and it's done. It's done. There's no qualification or anything other. I mean, I know some doctors ask like, how old are you or something, but not anything.
Yeah, but they're not go to physical therapy first, or are you mentally stable enough to handle this, like this surgery?
And then a lot of these women, right, like they'll have these periods, and a lot of people know women like this, right? Like we do. And then a lot of people do too, like that will have periods that they'll be bedridden. Like the pain is excruciating. They're bleeding. Volume is so heavy that they're exhausted. They're dehydrated. Like, you know, it just takes such a big toll on them so frequently. And it's like you barely recover from it, you know? Yeah.
Well, another thing I wanted to just mention real quick, because I feel like this is important just to get out there, because I don't feel like everybody knows this, but women and heart attacks. So a lot of women don't know they're having heart attacks because the symptoms that they're having are very similar to other symptoms that we have on a regular basis, like back pain, jaw pain, nausea, vomiting. That can be extra symptoms of a heart attack, or like the extra pain that we feel might just feel like an extra strain or heartburn or something. Like, so women aren't likely to call an ambulance or something because they don't think they're having a heart attack. They just think it's just another bout of pain. Isn't that insane?
Yeah. Yes.
Like, there needs to be more research on that.
And awareness, right? Just saying those words and getting that like knowledge out there alone makes women more self-aware, right? Like I think we are self-aware, but just understanding that no, it's not just anxiety or whatever you're being told, or thinking like something could be wrong, and take it seriously, take your body seriously, listen to your bodies, pay attention to what you're feeling, be aware of what's normal for you and what's not normal for you. And seek healthcare as much as you're capable of and have access to. Take full advantage of what you absolutely can, because it's essential for life and for our families and for your life and for society.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
And there are resources out there. It's just really hard to find, like healthcare.gov. You can find, if you're on a budget, you should be able to find something that fits your budget, but it doesn't sound like it works for everybody.
It does not work for everybody. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. And then even some of those low cost options, the coverage is so terrible. It's almost like having no coverage at all. So
wow.
Yeah, it's not as accessible as it definitely could be. anyway, Brittany and I, we really felt heavy about this topic tonight. We like to have a lot of fun and everything on the show, but we also want to bring up topics that we think are really important. And this is one of them. A lot of our listeners are female, a lot of females that are close to our age. And, you know, we hear you, and we're grateful for everybody's input who gave it. And we hope that you listen to this and relate and, I don't know, maybe learn something. But I think talking about these topics is really important. And that's kind of our focus tonight, is just bringing awareness to basic issues that females experience, particularly in the United States. And you're not alone. And, you know, we're here for you. Brittany and I are here for you. So definitely, reach out. Let's chat. Let's talk about it, because you're important and all of these things are important. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, and let us know what you want to hear next.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Bye, guys. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time on
the Experienship Podcast. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you're feeling fancy, leave us a review wherever you stream.
Bye.